Thank you, Kim, for that wonderful welcome and warm as always. I'm happy to be here. I have to share this. The last time I gave a keynote, it was before happy hour. Now it's after lunch. There's a pattern here. But nevertheless, the reason I started with that joke, I'm happy to spend this hour with all of you and the whole day, especially because what a wonderful paradigm to be here meeting in person and those virtually, right? It's really great. Happy days are here again. Thank you to Kim and the FutureCon team for a wonderful event here. Thanks to all the sponsors. And thanks to all of you and those attending virtually. We couldn't do this without you. So today I'm going to speak about cybersecurity horizons and the evolution of the CISO role. Please submit any questions you have. I look forward to continuing the conversation and connecting with this community of friends old and new that I have here. Detroit Metro is rocking it today, so happy to see all of you. With that said, as my friends in Britain say, let's get down to brass tacks. We'll skip this slide. Okay, all right. So, if you look around us today, there are so many disruptive forces in the industry. I've listed some of them here. Industry 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution. It's a sweeping change in manufacturing, and many of those of us like me who are in the automotive industry, we know that it means so many good things like automation, cycle time reduction, sensors in the shop floor, and just making the enterprise and manufacturing far more intelligent. We've been living in this era of distributed work now. Some people call it remote work. It brings its own security challenges. We'll talk about AI later. 5G, I think that's a disruption that not a lot of people think about because I think especially in manufacturing and other areas, it can cause significant disruptions. I don't think enough people are given enough thought to the security and privacy risk nexus. The Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, that's something really key. And then, of course, one of the things we see in the enterprise today is robotic process automation, the ability to make things more efficient, in finance and so on. Last but not the least, cryptocurrency, right? It's out there. And the reason I mention it is, I've heard tales of where people have found these crypto mining stuff within enterprises that are farming for cryptocurrency and so on. And it sounds kind of funny, but we need to think about all these things, right? So, if you look around us with all these disruptive forces out there, you have so many different risk areas. You might be wondering why there's some in dark blue and some in light blue. Well, the dark blue ones are the top, four key risks in manufacturing. And that's not to say the others are not important, but those four are the most important in manufacturing. I forget the name of the organization that has listed those, but it should come as no surprise. Supply chain attacks, right? Email phishing, which is dangerous insofar as its own self for fraud and things like that, but it's also most of the time the entry point for ransomware, like Honda found out, for example, a couple of times, in fact. And the Internet of Things, what a disruption, right? And all these things out there, right, it presents a lot of challenges for CISOs. I'm a big fan of Sun Tzu. You might have read The Art of War. And Sun Tzu said, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. So what a great opportunity for all CISOs and cybersecurity practitioners to actually embrace these challenges and man up, as my daughters used to say, to these challenges to help our enterprises. Oops, I think I went too far. Okay, now if you look, I try to create a timeline of some of the major incidents that have happened over the past few years. And this is not a complete listing by any means. I would just call out a few of them, of course. SolarWinds is a poster child for supply chain compromise, one of the points we talked about in the previous slide, right? Honda, the distributed enterprise of manufacturing, how ransomware through phishing and things like that can bring an enterprise down for days, weeks, and so on. Toyota recently faced a similar thing that I forgot to list there. Anyway, and then of course Colonial Pipeline, the gentleman earlier mentioned about that. Workada is an interesting one. It presents the unique challenge of the security and privacy risk nexus of the Internet of Things, because somebody, some threat actor or actors, they compromise a set of cameras, which then exposes companies to the privacy fines like GDPR and so on. I'll talk about that again in a minute. But also, I understood that they were able to steal intellectual property of working processes from a company and so on. So this is just, some of the incidents from the past, right? And why is it important to mention all this? It is because we'll talk more about cyber insurance later on, but when a cyber breach happens, right, the thing is you don't just lose revenue, you lose your reputation, your brand is impaired, you'll have financial impact because you may lose future business, or even if your plant or plants are down, you lose that amount of time. Plus the customer will fine you. I think there's some sort of metric like it's 500,000 per hour of downtime in automotive. So just do the math, right? When you're down for weeks, what does it mean? It's not good. And on it goes. Plus, if upper management is there fighting breaches, well then, they're not managing the company. So now when you consider all those factors, the Ponemon Institute has created this thing. They've said 3.86 million is the global cost on an average basis for a breach. They said that 175 cost per record, $75 per record. You may think, on the dark web they sell it for $5 or $10. I don't really know. I haven't tried, but so I've heard. But we say $5, $10, or $20. Why is it 175? Because what Ponemon Institute did is they've quantified all those things above into this metric. So if you think about it, some number of years ago, it was Anthem that had about, I think, 80 million records stolen. Do the math, guys, right? It's serious business. That's why enterprises need all of you, right? And some more factoids here. This is a scary thought, right? By 2025, cybercrime is going to cost $10.5 trillion. I don't even know how many zeros that is, for God's sakes. It's just a huge amount. It's scary to me, right? Data breach costs last year increased from the 3.2 on the previous slide to 4.24 million on the average. And here's another one. By 2025, 75 billion IoT devices will be in use. Think about that, right? The risk exposure. And, I won't say my personal favorite, but the one that I have been tracking since 2013 is the one in the middle. 95% of cybersecurity breaches are human error. And what's important about that is a lot of ROI can be done by training and awareness, right, with a relatively small stuff. And it's also important in this area of distributed work, because when people sit at home, for example, you may check your email, personal email, from your work computer, and it may not have the same protections as a corporate one, and that might be an entry point for ransomware as an example. So we need to think about all these things, right? And then, of course, 79% of organizations have faced an identity-related breach. Startling statistics, aren't they? So, what do we see on the horizon? This is a transition slide for the next section here. To me, the CISO is like the captain on the old ships that navigated the world, right? Looking into the horizon, trying to avoid the rocks in the water, the stormy seas, the choppy seas, right? And what you need to be able to do is be able to be proactive and look into the future to leverage proactively the triad of people, process, and technology. So really the CISO is the captain of the good ship cyber. It's scary in some ways if you look at the stats like that, but it's very, very important time for CISOs and the security teams that work with them. Okay, so I have come up, in my opinion, with in 2022 and beyond, I think 8 of these sort of predictions, right? The first one, CISOs will join the top ranks of management at an accelerated rate. Number 2, security budgets will increase as cyber insurance premiums skyrocket. Number 3, zero trust will come of age and passwords will be a thing of the past. 4, blockchain, AI, and ML, relevance of that trifecta will increase for cybersecurity. Number 5, the fields of InfoSec, privacy, and enterprise risk will converge. 6, IoT devices will be the root cause of multiple security and privacy breaches. 7, SolarWinds was just the start, in my opinion. Supply chain risk will accelerate due to ransomware exploits. And last, security and privacy will both be widely impacted by regulations globally. With that introduction, I'm going to do a little chat about each of those. Number 1, the rise of the CISO. I've been a CISO since 2003, and those were the days when you were neither seen nor heard. You worked quietly in the background. You're a purely technical CISO, or at least that was the perception. Of 2003, today is almost 2023, 20 years later. The CISO role has evolved, my friends, right? Over the years, it then became like the IT aligned with the business, the CISO aligned with the business. More recently, it's been about the risk-focused CISO, right? And then there's also a notion of CISO being a transformational agent, not just the CIO, because you can make so many changes to enable the business. Because security is not supposed to be the department of no. Security should be a business enabler while proactively mitigating business risk. So what does that mean from an organizational perspective? Where do we go from here? I think more CISOs will report directly to CEOs or COOs. I think more CISOs will become CIOs or might even have a double role. You know, some CIOs I already know are reporting to CISOs, right? And then my personal favorite prediction is as the fields of InfoSec, privacy, and enterprise risk converge, I think there's a great opportunity for CISOs to be chief risk officers of companies, right? Because it is all about risk, right? And risk management. Now, number 2, security budgets will increase sharply, maybe by double digits per year for a number of years, because of the backdrop that I already talked about earlier, so I won't spend time there. And the reason for that, if you look at some of these statistics here about cyber insurance, my God, it's not cheap, is it? So as a CFO, CISO, or CIO, you know, you've got to really think really hard. Do you want to invest in your people, process, and technology with a relatively low investment and higher ROI? Or do you want to pay for cyber insurance with things that are excluded? So I do believe that companies are already realizing that and will continue to realize that and strengthen the cybersecurity program, right? Now, of course, I do realize there's a little bit of difficulty with getting people because I understand this 3 million positions open worldwide, but still, I mean, it's something to think about, right? Because the gentleman earlier talked about getting cyber insurance doesn't prevent your accident. You know, I really like that one. I forgot his name, I'm sorry, but it's true. Not only doesn't prevent accident, you know, you're being reactive, and, you know, we cannot afford to be reactive. We have to be proactive, right? Yeah, prediction number 3, you know, some years ago, I had the good fortune on a identity conference to be on a panel about zero trust, you know, and ever since then, my friend Brian Schneebly from SentinelOne calls me the Detroit zero trust evangelist. Okay, thanks, Brian, but, you know, zero trust to me is something really great, and I think many people don't understand what zero trust is. I will talk more about that a little bit later. But zero trust, I think previously it got a bad name. It is a marketing buzzword. Heck, one day a company I won't name which called me saying, hey, if you invest in our technology, you'll be zero trust compliant. I thought to myself, what? So, you know, I think there are, you know, we as an industry got to realize what zero trust really is. More on that later. But I was very, very, very happy to see the recent US cybersecurity order that has made zero trust the centerpiece, no less, of the government cybersecurity strategy. And what I'm hoping is those tailwinds will propel zero trust to the enterprises, and organizations such as NIST will start to have standards and so on around that, right? And another good thing about zero trust, it's very hard to strengthen the security across the N-tier deep supply chain. But think about it. If all or many can embrace zero trust and put the layer of controls, more on that later, how much stronger the enterprise ecosystem will be. And remember I said earlier, security should not be the department of no. Security should be an enabler. One of the reasons and one of the main ways to achieve that is to move towards passwordless. And passwordless doesn't come for free, of course. It has to be powered by the trifecta of identity, zero trust, and software-defined perimeter, right? So, and more on that later. Now, this is an interesting one. I think I would split it up into two parts. Some comments about 5G and some about AI and ML, right? So I think 5G will fuel the adoption of IoT devices. From a security perspective, it can help us decentralize domain name administration. Blockchain can help strengthen security, right? It can help protect edge devices from denial of service attacks. Blockchain can. It can also help secure data at rest by distribution and decentralization. And it can also help provide trust assurance for security controls in transit and at rest. And as far as AI and ML goes, right, it can power adaptive, proactive control strategies in the enterprise. It can help identify emerging threats proactively based on patterns of behavior. It can help provide proactive insights to strengthen asset security through predictive analytics and act upon them. And it can help enhance enterprise protection. Of course, here's a caveat. AI, what one has to be careful of is bias. So we need to be careful when you adopt AI-based systems because we want to make sure the calibration is right, there's some level of supervised AI. And this is not a rant about AI is bad. No. When I came to the United States all those years ago, one of the first classes I took was Introduction to Intelligent Systems, AI class. So I love AI. All I'm saying is you have to manage the risk of AI, okay? Oops. I think this is prediction number 5, the right one. So, remember what I said earlier at the sort of the transition slide. Today, if you look, InfoSec is under IT, and the gentleman earlier talked about the hens and the foxes in the in-house. Couldn't agree more. I don't believe InfoSec believes in IT going forward, right? Privacy has been under legal and enterprise risk under finance. And what I see going forward, first, a federation of those functions, even through a program management approach for them to work together, because sometimes those functions work in a vacuum and in silos, right? But I think I see the day coming when all those functions will be in the same organization under a chief risk officer. And this is something to look forward to. It's not going to happen overnight, but we need to get there because it's all about managing enterprise risk smartly, and those 3 functions need to work closer together like never before. Now, if you look at IoT threats, the IT and OT convergence, right? This is very good. On the other hand, IT and OT do not always work together in organizations. They work in a vacuum. So there's great need for IT and OT to work together to minimize some of the risks listed there. Because IoT devices, they're not patched often. Device authentication registration is not so good sometimes. There's not adequate encryption at rest and in transit. The data management strategy for IoT devices are sort of loosey-goosey, right? And there might be flaws in the API connections between IoT devices and the cloud, as an example, right? And remembering that, Statista said that 75 billion IoT devices 2025. We got to think about this seriously, right? Because at the end of the day, the security and privacy risk nexus is huge. It's not the security things, the breaches, but the privacy ramifications because of GDPR and so on. When you have fines like up to 4% of the revenue, double jeopardy applies, civil suits. One has to start taking the IoT far more seriously than many companies have. And number 7, supply chain security. The poster child, as I noted earlier, is SolarWinds. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? We have to be very careful with supply chain. We need security. We need to promote the adoption of zero trust across the enterprise, the principles thereby. We need to really think about data protection and governance across the supply chain. Because, the supply chain, for example, can be an opportunity for threat actors to commit fraud, like through spear phishing, phishing and those kinds of things. I remember reading some years ago, one company paid $45 million through a fraud, through who they thought was a trusted supplier, right, as an example. There's a lot of technology risk there as well, because not everyone has the same level of maturity. That's why I'm hoping zero trust can be adopted across the supply chain, so we can be stronger and better together there. And in third-party risk, the Marriott breach, if during M&A activities, you got to think about those things. You're acquiring a company, are they up to snuff? Do you want to acquire them? So I could probably speak for half an hour on this subject, but I'm not going to do that today. So something to think about, eh? And, the last prediction is that there's so many regulations out there, right? GDPR is widely considered to be the gold standard of privacy. We recently had the US CyberSecurity executive order. Then California has the IoT security law, which is in its infancy, but a good move nevertheless. All it says, if there's IoT security breach, if they have found that you had a default password, there'll be fines. Not enough, but it's a start, right? The China data security law and the China personal information protection law. Brazil has its adoption of GDPR and so on. So the thing is, and why do I mention this here? Some years ago, somebody said to me, Arun, why do you talk about privacy so much? You're a good security guy. There's confidentiality and privacy, they're the same thing. And I said, I don't agree with you. Confidentiality is about data, and privacy is about people. And the only time those two fields become inextricably intertwined when the data is about people, and ergo to my comments about GDPR and all those things, right? So we need to think about all this because of the financial and reputational damages that could happen if you violate any of these alphabet soup of regulations. Okay, so next segment. If you look at the CISO role, right, to me, the three main, pillars for CISO in the modern era are business enablement, cost optimization, and risk management, right? And why risk management, right? Because at the end of the day, all the prior factoids show the universe of risk out there. And as a CISO, you want to help the company grow organically or through M&A. But before you help the company create value, you need to protect value today, right? Because if you don't do that and you have data breaches, as we discussed earlier, there can be hell to pay, right? Both in regulatory fines and financial impact. And one of the things I always talk about is the trifecta of identity, integration, insights to help implement and power zero trust and other strategies. Because at the end of the day, as CISOs, security professionals, we need to have the due care and due diligence every day, all the time, right? And data protection is huge. My friend Bob Kidder says, it's all about the data. I agree. Now, if you look to what I call the CISO charter, the CISO has to respond to challenges of a rapidly changing work environment. I remember a couple of years ago, on one Friday, we were in the office, and on Monday, we were working from home. And at least I'll talk about ourselves, we were able to do that because we had a good identity management platform that helped us to do single sign-on and so on remotely with multi-factor. It was good, right? So, and that's because, the company and us, we put that framework in place. So I think as CISOs, we need to be able to support the era of distributed work because it's only going to go increase. And as CISOs, we've got to accept significant responsibility for protecting the enterprise, which then also means it doesn't come easy. We need to develop the right skills personally, but also for our teams, because we need to have career pathing, succession planning, and a skills and competency framework to drive those things. We need to have partnerships with universities and industry organizations, right? And the CISO scope, and this is, not a complete list, by the way. This is just my view of what I think is some of the main areas today. The cloud and mobile, the huge IoT and supply chain. I always say identity is the cornerstone of security delivery. Identities and zero trust and software-defined perimeter, these are huge, right? Risk management is very important, like I mentioned earlier. But a couple of other things. CISOs have to be involved in business operations and strategy because we can't operate in a vacuum. We need to know from the business, what are they thinking? Are they operating joint ventures in high-risk countries, or they're starting a new acquisition? So we need to be at the table with these conversations, right? And, like I mentioned to you, in 2003, I started as a CISO. I was much younger, came from a technical background. I'll be honest, I had to grow up fast. I had to acquire a lot of skills. And over the years, I found that many things that I didn't know to do then over the years, and this is kind of the distillation of what I learned as a CISO role and what's helping me today. Business partnership, business alignment, because you can't operate in a vacuum, right? You can't deploy security controls because they're glamorous. No, you can't. You've got to make sure that your strategic plan is aligned with the business objectives, right? That's the first thing. CISOs, fundamentally today, when you're balancing risk and transformation, at heart and essentially change agent. That means embrace change fearlessly on a personal level, but also with your teams, because you can't shrink from the challenge. You've got to accept the change, embrace it, and drive it fiercely. In this, I think collaboration with the extended partners within the company and outside, it's really very important. Communication is key. You have to do that because you can't be having radio silence. CISOs have to be great communicators, right? And personally, for me, in the beginning when I started, right, I have to explain all these things about security to people, and their eyes were starting to glaze over, right? And I said, what am I to do? And I read a book called The Art of Storytelling, and I've forgotten the author. I think it's Annette something. But from that, I understood the power of storytelling. If you can share key elements in your career journey where people can relate to you, it helps you build a relationship, and many a time explain what you're trying to do. So I think envisioning and storytelling are very important, both in the one-on-one interaction, but also as you start to frame new initiatives and get business support. Relationship, program management, these are very, very important, right? Negotiation. Now, of course, if you have a very good purchasing department that you can say, hey, get me the right contract, that's great. But most of the time, it's not like that. I found I have to be in the conversation. I need to spend cycles. I've been to contract management training myself. It's helped me a lot. The companies I've worked for a lot to find the right win-win of price versus value with the strategic partners. And strategic cost optimization is very important. Not all security programs have huge budgets, so you got to always know, where to spend wisely along with negotiation. And the last part of that pillar is vendor management or partner management, because we're not in this battle alone. You can't be calling vendors and screaming at them, saying, hey, I want you to cut the price. They're going to tell you to pound sand, aren't they? You have to spend time to build a relationship with all the vendors and partners on an ongoing basis. One of the things I've done is for strategic partners. I have a quarterly meeting with them to see, okay, where are we at with the major contract. I even have monthly ones with some, and sometimes at the beginning of the year I share with them my goals and objectives. So build those relationships, right, and nurture them. And CISO Cornerstones: people, process, technology. People. 95% of security incidents come from people. The biggest ROI you can get, invest in training and awareness, right, based on your budget. That's huge. And then a business partnership, CISOs and security teams are not islands. Build a relation with IT, build it across the business with legal, with HR. It's very, very important because at the end of the day, people are the first line of defense. Like I mentioned earlier, alliances, strategic partnerships, inside and outside the company. These are huge. From a business process perspective, right in the beginning, I built out this first strategic plan when I was this current company with the enterprise risk assessment, but I mapped the findings to the business goals. And every year we look at that and adapt the goals, right? And secure sourcing is very important because before you sign any contracts, make sure that you have the right checks and balances. You can't do anything after the fact, right? Cloud governance is important. It's not just before the contract is signed, after the fact. Even if you're interested, we can talk about cloud governance playbook that I've built out over the years, right? And then, of course, identity lifecycle management, not just identity management. Because if you look at identity management, in my opinion, there are two sides of the coin. Identity enablement, single sign-on, multi-factor, the ability to have automatic provisioning and deprovisioning powered by the HRIS system, right, to minimize business risk. This side is identity governance, the periodic user access reviews, making sure the enterprise supply chain partners, they're decommissioned if they leave the company and things like that. So identity life cycle management is the name of the game, right? And then from a technology perspective, right, identity, zero trust, and software-defined perimeter, they extend digital perimeter. And of course, as CISOs, we need to deploy and nourish and nurture a layered security architecture. There's not any one tool that can help you be secure. A quick note on that, my perspective on this is that always try to map the security tools to 3 different layers, right? Application security, services security, and infrastructure security. And by no means is this supposed to be a complete listing of all the things that one could put into that. It's up to you, up to your enterprise. But what I simply wanted to say is with a framework like this, you can make sure that you're refreshing your tools in the proper way. Sometimes you can consolidate, sometimes you can converge, but not all the time, right? So having a vision of this kind of an architecture is very helpful. It's helped me. And right now, if you look out internally and externally within your company and other places, digital transformation is the name of the game, right? And identity ties it all together to enable digital transformation so you can protect all of those things up in the right corner. Because as you start helping enable the business, in many cases you're adopting cloud applications, you're automating governance and identity lifecycle management. You're essentially weaving security and privacy into people, processes, and technology, aren't you? Because why are you doing that? So that you can proactively protect against threats by analyzing them in near real time, and AI can help with that, as we noted earlier. And when you use identity as digital perimeter, I have this notion of the identity coin. The identity coin, one is the physical identity coin, the person, device, location, and the other side is the logical one, where you talk about attribute, behavior, context, and role-based access control. And these are important inputs to power zero trust in near real time, or even software-defined perimeter, right? And zero trust, complements identity, right? Identity, it's, in my opinion, like a layer around identity along with SDP. And just a shout out to John Kinderwag, who actually think 2013, he said, you've got to stop trusting packets as if they are people. And there's no such notion of, trusted internal networks and untrusted external networks. Basically, you have to assume that all network traffic is untrusted. So therefore, it helps to transform conventional network-based security in multi-cloud environments. So what does it really mean? You're focusing security nexus on users and data rather than network packets. And this is a paradigm shift, by the way. And one of the very important things to enable zero trust successfully, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, is help strengthen privacy as well. Because at the end of the day, the benefits of adopting zero trust are all listed there. It helps diminish risk, helps enhance business agility, it helps increase efficiency, promote visibility with the right set of tools and the right analytics. In many cases, it helps reduce costs too, because I know, for example, when we went from the legacy VPN to zero trust model, we saved a lot of money, right? And it helps prevent breaches across the length, breadth, and depth of the supply chain. Zero trust principles. It's not buying one platform for zero trust. It's going to make you zero trust compliant, like the true story I told you earlier. Zero trust is a culture change, right? Because you're managing security from the inside out versus instead of vice versa. It's leveraging identity as digital perimeter on top of that, based on the notion of every connection on its merits on the session risk. You're actually ensuring secure application access, leveraging data encryption, orchestration, and behavioral access control, right? It means that, just like you say in HIPAA, the minimum necessary. So you're giving the users the least amount of privilege, right, that they need, no more and no less. And educating users about risk management is very important because, like the example I gave to you before, if you're going to use your work laptop, checking your personal mail, beware of dangers, right? So it's not only just the technology, people have to play a part as well, right? And the gentleman earlier talked about the NIST principles, and I'm a big believer, though our security program is pinned to the ISO because of, I've worked with it for many number of years, and global companies, ISO is well adopted, especially in Europe. But I'm a big believer in these principles, right, of identify, detect, protect, recover, and respond. And I just put my take on that is, identify, gain visibility to assets. Because if you can't see it, you can't protect it, right? You don't know what's wrong. Detect, I think gentlemen talked about earlier. You need to be proactive, and like I mentioned, harness AI, ML, and blockchain. And then protect, deploy an integrated layered security architecture. It's very, very important because you can't have islands of tools. They need to work together in concert. Nobody wants to think about recovery, right? But you have to make sure that you have a solid incident response plan. We need to have annual tabletop exercises, get your business involved if they're so inclined, make sure your playbook's up to date and whatnot, right? And of course, if you do have to recover and respond, make sure that you document the lessons learned and corrective actions going forward, right? And I would say some things that are very, very important that you need to do is, build alliances, right, across the length, depth, and breadth of the business, but also on an individual basis, be part of organizations like the Cloud Security Alliance, or Women's Security Alliance, or ISC2, or ISACA, because the more, obviously you can't be members of all of them, but we are better together, the power of federation, right? And even if you look in the vendor community today, there are two notable alliances. The first, the Spectra Alliance, which includes certain companies, and the Zero Trust Alliance, which includes some other companies. Even the companies are realizing together, they're not competing, they need to work together so that not only the direct customers can benefit from the collaboration, but those that are not having all the tools can also benefit. So the world is going there. So make sure to build alliances both at a professional level and individual level. We'll make sure to work together and share best practices, right? Because we're not islands, we can learn from others. Gosh, I've learned things from so many people. I try to help people. We're not alone, we are better together. And one thing that I always say, the tagline of our security program are two: security powered by people and the power of federation. That is the ability to leverage the synergy of N-tier deep length, depth, and breadth collaboration across the enterprise ecosystem. And we'll all be the better for it. Now, I'm going to spend some time now. We're talking about IoT security. And the reason for that, as I mentioned, 75, whatever number of billion, I guess, IoT devices in 2025, right? Because as we enter this era of the fourth industrial revolution, right, there are a lot of IoT devices coming in the enterprise level. Of course, a lot of IoT devices coming at a personal level too, like your wristwatches, your heart monitors, and whatnot. So, what are some of the IoT security drivers, right? You've got to utilize adaptive, proactive control strategies across a layered security architecture, right? And most importantly, you've got to unify a security strategy across the OT and IoT arena, where the key dimensions will sit here. Device visibility. Remember, if you can't see it, you cannot protect it. Policy definition, the ability to cascade the right level of controls. Behavior and risk analysis, because just like I mentioned earlier, human behavior, zero trust, the same principle has to apply to devices as well, and we need to think about that. And then policy enforcement and standards. Obviously, if you find devices that are not patched, not compliant, you can't just leave them there. You've got to be able to fix them, right? And then, of course, the IoT security operations should also be aligned with the NIST principles of identify, detect, and protect, right? So let's talk about identify, right? First, you need to be able to discover all managed and unmanaged devices via device library and AI techniques, because you can't discover them. People keep plugging in, there could be breaches, right? And even leverage probing techniques, etc. You need the ability to have network access and topological mapping of where all these devices are, what are they doing. You need to be able to classify these devices into groups so that you can maybe put segmentation the right way as appropriate. And then traffic analytics and visualization across these levels is important. And last but not the least is generating an automated device inventory and device profiling and behavioral analysis so that you can take corrective actions. And detect, right? You have to be able to identify and highlight profile analytics for each device, because you can't treat each device the same in your enterprise network. We need to deliver conversation maps of devices. What are these groups of devices doing together? What they're doing? Is it risky behavior, risky traffic patterns? What the heck are they doing, right? And if you do that, then you can probably be ahead of the curve, preventing ransomware as one example, right? And then providing device vulnerability based on in real time, and then detecting any unauthorized access, etc., right? And identifying vulnerable assets, especially, many a time in enterprises, some of these suppliers to machines and so on, they come in through probably not the best secure mechanism. So working with the OT side to make sure the same rigor of IT, of zero trust is applied there as well. And then, in order to protect these devices, you need to be able to blacklist or quarantine a device if you find it. You need to be able to generate automatic policies by device type for zero trust protection. We need to provide automatic generation of policies that refresh automatically, and then the ability to enforce microsegmentation policies directly on any network infrastructure on the OT side without requiring any third-party technology. This is what we need to do. I mean, it's not something done overnight, but you got to have a vision of the end state. And then, of course, these are what I call Magnificent 7 IoT security guiding principles, because I'm a big fan of movies, so I couldn't resist myself. So number one is characterize, right? Identify and classify assets based on business value and risk. Number two, is, sorry, it's the wrong slide. Number two is demarcate. It's the implementing network zones with clear demarcation between IT and OT networks. Then understand, right? Visualize and identify threats and vulnerabilities across the network. Then unify, control access by users and devices across secure wired and wireless access. Then adapt, right? Leverage zero trust to enact adaptive control strategies to the IoT, okay? And then converge is really, develop explicit third-party access and risk management protocols, because many times it could be a breach to these less conventional network channels like, equipment suppliers or whatever, right? And then beware, right? At all times, make sure I/O devices up to snuff. Look for embedded credentials, lack of encryption, weak API security. So these are the 7 IoT security guiding principles. And then, remember I said, people understand the identity of people, but the device identity is an emerging area you need to think about, right? Because at the end of the day, this universe of IoT devices, we need to think of having a naming system for IoT devices. You need to think of an identity lifecycle for IoT devices, because gosh, just like you don't want a supplier who has left the company, his credentials still active, you don't want a device that is not needed on the network anymore. Pull it out, right? And retire it. You want to be able to enable data-driven, stratified IoT device registration, right? You need to have proper security and privacy protocols, because like I told you, the security and privacy risk nexus of the IoT is pretty scary. One has to also illustrate an authentication and authorization process for IoT devices, right? People shouldn't just be plugging things into your network wherever it is. And then use firewalls and network segmentation accordingly. I think this is my last slide. I think the left one is, whether it's for IoT or even for IT or security, the important thing is don't just deploy technology for technology's sake, right? Make sure that technology is being deployed tied to the business. Make sure you have vision and architecture supporting the business, right? Make sure to enact, you have the enterprise partnerships to have the right cost, the right deployment model, making sure that the payback and ROI can be well established. Technology validation, service assurance, and federated deployment. These are also key principles to live by for almost any area of IT. And last but not the least, the principles of the right, harness technologies to strengthen IoT asset characterization and security, manage security in unison, right? Not like OT by themselves and IT by themselves. It's too risky. You need to work together. Leverage people, process, and technology in concert, and then the rest, of course, we talked about earlier. So thank you all again for your attention. Once again, in closing, I would thank all of you and Kim, Hakeem, and FutureCon organization for the excellent event and giving me a chance to speak to you. And remember, as Sun Tzu said, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity.
Hey, Arun. So we're living in the time of the Great Recession, not recession.
Resignation.
Great resignation, okay. Where a restaurant worker can quit today and tomorrow they work across the street at a greater job. So cybersecurity teams are actually doing the same thing as groups and teams. So what does a CISO do to mitigate that risk for an organization that's facing this new dynamic?
Pray, no, just kidding. There is, I think I touched upon it earlier, right? A CISO's job is never done. Now, obviously, part of the solution, if it makes sense, is to have managed services, part. But you know that the managed service providers are facing the same talent shortage, right? So I think people are the wealth of any company, security, IT organization, whatever. So the important thing is, I would say, to get back to the first principle. The first principle, if you're a CISO, you need to understand what are the services that you're delivering. In order to support those services, what are the key skills you need to have, and what kind of roles they are. And then, what you've got to do is you've got to decide your strategy, either unilaterally or by segment. What I mean is, look, I didn't grow up here. I grew up in India, but I do know that in NFL and the other one, MLB and all that, there are two ways to hire people, right? One is to hire the free agents, and the other is to do what? Go to the draft. What happens if you hire free agents? Somebody will throw you the money, right? They'll go across the road. So what I've done in my team, by and large, is to go to the draft. And the ability to use co-op students and so on and give them a chance to grow. You've got to give them a little bit of a leash and build it that way. I'm on the intermediate school district. I work with them and some other organizations, building the alliances, with the universities and so on, and going out there, getting people to do. And just building those stuff. And I work with your vendors and partners too, to the extent you can. And I think it's a hybrid approach. But at the same time, having done that, enacted that, if people are a true wealth, show them you mean it. Make sure they're paid up to market. But beyond that, small things like a thank you, et cetera, and just keep doing that. I know it's a bit of long-winded answer, but I guess you have to do all of these things all of the time, and you need to have a little bit of luck as well, right? Hope that helped.
Hey, Arun. Thank you for the presentation. Jake with Zscaler. And as I said yesterday, I'm not wearing khakis, but it's Jake. So early in the presentation, you had stated that security has to be a business enabler, right? And oftentimes in my career and others, we find security that they say no, right? They say no, or they block, or they're a blocker to an enabler. And as we try to get the teams to work together, between operations, network, application, development. Could you share your experience or maybe some tips on how we can kind of collaborate better with those teams?
Yeah, absolutely. A true story, when I started this current company, I signed up that within 60 days, I would do an enterprise risk assessment. And I could have gone and got a third party to do it and spend, $50,000, $100,000, whatever. But I didn't do it like that, right? I went across the length, depth, and breadth of the business, meeting so many different people and explaining to them, listening to them, understanding their concerns, right? What were they? And I started with a fundamental thing, the power of federation, one relationship at a time. Because the thing is, it doesn't matter how strong your vision is. If you're not able to build a relation with people, if you're not able to do the envision and storytelling, one relationship at a time, you're doomed for failure. So that's the secret sauce. I spend inordinate amounts of time, maybe not so much in coffee during the Zoom, coffee conversations with people, hallway. I have Information Security and Privacy Council. We have actually something called the Federation Call, where people across the length, depth, and breadth of the business come every month, right? Nurturing the relationship. Like I mentioned, with strategic vendors, I have quarterly reviews. I am part of industry groups. And I guess what I can say to you honestly, Jake, if you want to be successful, build and nurture those relationships. Because at the end of the day, if you're working in concert towards the same mission for the greater good, I think that's a very powerful paradigm. Now, to your first comment. If you are CISO and you're a department of no, they'll say, hasta la vista, baby, right? And you can't do that. Now, am I saying that you need to sing Kumbaya and say, okay, plug anything anywhere? No. But if you take the principles of relationship over time, you share the strat plan, you show the progress metrics, and get the business involved with you, they'll be more likely to listen to you. And that's why a very important thing is, first in your CISO role, you need to pick a couple of key initiatives to work with the business that they can understand that you are serious. Like in our case, when I did the enterprise risk assessment, 3 of the key risks we had were cloud governance, onboarding and offboarding, and intellectual property protection. There were 2 or 3 others. But the key initiative that I was able to drive in partnership with the HR and the larger business, identity lifecycle management. First, we did the identity enablement, first with the single sign-on for cloud and on-prem applications, and then the automated provisioning and deprovisioning like that, and then later with partners like Bob Kidder there and the internal control doing the identity governance. But when you show the business, in reality, you said security can be an enabler, you need to show them that. Same for the end user, in the past before the identity framework, they had 20 applications. What did they do? They had these sticky notes with stuff in their wallet. And now they can sign on to all those just by going to dashboard, multi-factor, and all that. The point I'm trying to make is saying security and enabler is not enough. Show them. You make a promise, keep it. And then as time passes, you build that level of trust. Does that help, Jake?
I think we have time for one more question, but maybe there's not any. Of course, you're from Zscaler.
Oh, yes, of course. Right. Okay, last question. So you put up a slide that said the evolution of a CISO may evolve into a CRO. When I first saw this, I thought Chief Revenue Officer, but it's Chief Risk Officer, and I'm not seeing that a lot. Maybe it's just me. Explain a little bit more around that thinking.
So, that's more of the sort of Arun's pie in the sky thinking that I feel the industry needs to go there, right, ultimately, because if you look at it today, enterprise risk is done by, it's just more than finance, right? It's not, so I think the opportunity for, people with technical skills and MBA to become chief risk officers, because you got to span not just the pure financial risk, but across, because many organizations, enterprises is done by people in, finance or something, and they pick the risk by just throwing, darts at a dartboard. What you need is a well-planned, cogent approach. And I think going forward, especially because I think there's an opportunity for the functions of InfoSec, privacy, and enterprises to converge, I think there's a possibility for the right candidates and the right companies to take that quantum level leap. That's my honest thing, but I think we should aspire to that.
I think we are at time. Thank you. Arun, thank you so much. And everybody look around the room. I mean, when's the last time we've seen a crowd like this? So applause to you guys for being here, and applause for Arun being here.